Zipper rolls out to the right, pitches off to Taylor, and Taylor's to the 20, down to the 15, down to the 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Billy Taylor scored a touchdown from 21 yards out. The crowd goes berserk. It was November 22nd, 1969. That they came to Barry, Michigan, all dressed in maize and blue. The words were said, the prayers were read, and everybody cried. But when they closed the coffin, there was someone else inside. Oh, they came to Barry, Michigan, but Michigan wasn't dead. And when the game was over, it was someone else instead. 11 Michigan Wolverines put on the gloves of gray, and as the organ played the victors, they laid Woody Hayes away. Under center is Wangler at the 45. He goes back. He's looking for a receiver. He throws downfield to Carter. Who's got it better than us? Nobody!
Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. I hope you enjoyed the bye week. There were some great games to watch on Saturday, especially the Minnesota-Penn State game and the LSU-Alabama game, which was probably the best matchup I've seen this year. We'll talk about those games and our little backyard brawl this week with the Spartans in the Big House in just a moment. Joining us on our Game Day segment will be Nick Baumgardner from the Athletic Detroit. First, my view from Section 17 to get us started as we do each week. And I'll keep it short because my segment with Nick is about 30 minutes long. I watched the Michigan State-Illinois game until I was convinced it was over in the first half. Then I switched over to Alabama-LSU. Then I started getting instant messages from friends telling me to check out what was happening in East Lansing, and I couldn't believe the Spartans blew that lead. They are no doubt a team that is not very good right now. Does that mean we're going to roll them in the Big House on Saturday? Well, I'd like to say yes, but discretion being the better half of valor leads me to say I have my doubts. The Spartans will come to play this Saturday, guaranteed. They always do in this game. On good or bad years, it's always the same. This is their red letter game, their Super Bowl. Not many people give them a chance in this game. They are 12-point underdogs, and they are wounded. We need to take it to them early, not let them hang around, and keep the pedal to the metal. Now, will we? We're going to find out on Saturday. My guest today says this Spartan team will not lay down on Saturday. They will bring it, but he still doesn't see any way they beat us. Nick Baumgardner from the Athletic Detroit is up next here on the Michigan Man in partnership with our friends at SB Nation's Maize and Brew, so stay tuned. Back with us on our Game Day segment as we just talk some college football and look ahead to the big game Saturday. In the Big House is Nick Baumgardner from the Athletic Detroit. Once again, great to have you back on the show, Nick.
Always good to be here, Mike.
Well, it was a great weekend with the bye for Michigan fans to, sit around, watch some other college football action, and there were some good games. And let's talk about a few of those first, Nick, before we talk Michigan football. Up in Minneapolis, P.J. Fleck and the guys against Penn State. I really didn't know how they would come out against Penn State, but yeah, Penn State had 3 big turnovers, but that was a big win for that program, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, big time. I mean, they, like you said, they came out like a house of fire there and jumped on them, and then sort of held on for dear life, which is, if I think back on it before the game, I'm like, yeah, that sounds about right. That's about what I thought might happen. But, they've had a really good season, of course. They haven't played a very tough schedule. This is obviously the first game they've played against anybody, that we would consider, to be top-notch. They still have games with Wisconsin and Iowa left. But, I think that we can probably say those are winnable games now, after, seeing them, go toe-to-toe and beat Penn State and control that game throughout parts of it. Not a perfect team, not the most talented team in the Big Ten, but a team that's done its job and done what it's supposed to do. I'll be a little interested to see what the playoff committee does with them. I mean, they kind of remind me of that Iowa team from 2015 that went 12-0, went through the season, didn't have to play anybody in the Big Ten East of note that year, I don't think. I think they missed everybody just about, and then ended up losing to Michigan State in the championship game. But, still a memorable season for them regardless. And, hey, PJ Fleck signed a big contract. I mean, maybe it's working. Row the boat, right? I guess something's going on. So it's working in some way.
Well, and there was another example for Penn State. Whether it's at home or on the road, you can't cough it up 3 times. And 2 of those interceptions were, I think, in the end zone. The third was a pick 6. So those were the deciding factors in that game.
Yeah, Penn State, they're a little bit like Michigan, I think, in that, at home, they're really, really tough to beat. At home at night, they're almost impossible to beat. And then when you get them on the road, it can be a challenge. So some younger talent on that team that's still growing a little bit. But, that's kind of been Penn State's bag, under James Franklin. I think his everybody talks about Jim Harbaugh's road record against ranked teams being poor. Franklin's is equally bad. Right. I mean, they had their win against Iowa earlier this year, was the first one he's ever had. And this would be another loss on the road against a ranked team. So that's another task that Penn State is still trying to solve.
In other action around the Big Ten, Ohio State just lit up Maryland, and they've got Rutgers coming up next, which should be pretty much the same. And either they just haven't played anyone yet, or they are just that good. What does the eye test tell you so far when you've seen them play, Nick?
It's crazy. I mean, I don't remember seeing a situation where, and I know Ryan Day was so involved with everything they were doing offensively last year, and maybe more so than I probably realized, I think, for all of us looking on the outside. I can't think of a time where you got a new coach, a new quarterback, and the offense just doesn't miss a beat. I mean, it is crushing. I mean, it's they are darn near impossible to defend. I don't know how you're supposed to do it, unless you have just elite athletes all over the field, because there's so many things they can do. They're confident in everything they do. They're very well prepared. I think that of all the things, Mike, I think that's what stands out to me the most. They are obviously the most talented team in the Big Ten, right? They're one of the most talented teams in the country. They've recruited that way, but they are so locked in to play football with everything they do every single week. And I was at Michigan State, Ohio State earlier this season. They had a relatively rough first quarter for their standard, and then in a blink of an eye turned on and had like 300 yards in the second quarter, and I mean just annihilated whoever was in front of them for 15 minutes and then just kept the foot on the gas. I mean, they have an ability to really zero in and focus, and everybody does their job, and people don't make stupid mistakes. And that's how you score 73 points, right? I mean, that's how you score like that. Even it doesn't matter who you're playing. I mean, if you're playing Rutgers or Maryland or whatever, I mean, you still have to be on your game all the way through. And I think what they have there is they have the first unit does its job, the second unit does its job, and then whoever gets a chance to come in and, if you get 5 reps, you got to make the most of them. And they've got, it's a bully of a program. I mean, there's no question about it. Yeah, they look terrifying. I think if you're somebody else looking at them, terrifying. I mean, you have to play your best game against them, obviously, and then you're going to have to hope that, they screw some things up, frankly. And so far that hasn't happened.
No, it hasn't. And the offense has just been unbelievable. It's very scary to watch, there's no question. But I think what really grinds Michigan fans is that defense is playing at more than an elite level to complement the offense. And Greg Madison is the co-defensive coordinator, which really bugs Michigan fans, I know.
Right, yeah. I get that part of it. I also would add in there what was Greg Schiano doing, because this defense is pretty much the same guys that was on last year's defense that couldn't stop a cold. And, I mean, it's interesting, though, right? Because I understand why grinds Michigan fans up for sure. But in a lot of ways, Greg Madison did that for Michigan when he came and sort of saved the wreckage of Rich Rodriguez's defense. I mean, he's very good, even at 70 or however old he is now. He's very good at steadying some chaos and just getting players to play, to their talent level. That's Greg Madison. To me, that's Greg Madison's like signature ability is to clear the mind and get guys to play at their skill level. And Ohio State's skill level on defense is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's like that's all it took, really. I mean, it was him, and they've got the other guy in there, the younger guy. I can't think of his name now, but an interesting situation for sure, and one that they're the number 2 team in the country now, I think. That's pretty undisputed at this point, I would imagine.
Well, the big game on Saturday, of course, was the LSU-Alabama game down in Tuscaloosa. Really the best game I've seen so far this year. Those two teams, Alabama and LSU, are playing at a level, I think, above everyone else except Ohio State.
Yeah, it's those three. I was talking to somebody over the weekend about what do you do with the playoff here, and do you leave Alabama out? And, Tua had 405 yards and 3 or 4 touchdowns, and I think he had ankle surgery a month ago. I mean, that's that's saying something. And then, obviously Alabama's still completely loaded, and LSU. I mean, the job that everyone there has done, from Ed Orgeron on down. Joe Burrow has been, amazing. I don't think anyone saw this coming from him, but it really goes to show. LSU's always had talent, and they certainly do offensively right now. I recognize. I look at the roster and I see guys like Jamar Chase, and I remember Jamar Chase as a recruit, a top end guy that everybody wanted, and then he went to LSU. And you didn't hear from him for a second, and now he's exploding. And you see all these guys put in position to succeed, and the quarterback really coming into his own. They've got a really really unique situation there with Joe Brady. Isn't their offensive coordinator? I think Steve Ensinger, I think is his name. He's the offensive coordinator, and Brady is the passing game. I mean, they have a really unique setup. It works for them, and it's the best example this season probably of coaching staff and roster sort of blending together and maximizing everything. And what a great win! I mean, how many times has Alabama lost in Tuscaloosa in the last 10 years?
Exactly.
2 or 3?
Yeah, that's it.
3
years, yeah.
It's just crazy. And so, LSU's jacked up. And I think it's interesting because I saw, maybe 3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago, LSU got a commitment from a, top 5 or 6 player, I think it was a tight end, who was supposed to go to Alabama and decided to go to LSU. So, hey, that's interesting, and maybe some things will shift. We'll see. We'll see how it plays out, but big win for the Tigers for sure.
Yeah, it was a great game to watch. The thing that I was thinking about, though, Nick, watching that game is from the get-go, Tua just looked like he was very gingerly moving on that ankle, and he had surgery a couple of weeks ago, and so he obviously was cleared to play. But by late in that game and then after the game, he looked like he could hardly walk.
It's been going on for a while now. I remember that last year they had some situations where he looked like he could barely move. And then now obviously he's had the surgery and he's still out there trying to do it. And, that's going to be an interesting situation going forward, to see, how healthy he is or isn't. And, what time, we're talking about possibly the number 1 pick in the draft here, at what point in time does he say maybe, all right, I've given you all I can give you.
With us here on our Game Day segment is Nick Baumgardner from the Athletic Detroit. So, Nick, let's talk about our 2 local teams. And, of course, we know what's happening on Saturday. But I guess my question is right now, just like everyone else that lives in this state, is what in the heck is going on in East Lansing?
It's interesting, but it's not. In some ways, it's the most obvious thing ever. Michigan State went through the offseason. It's a very stubborn deal here. They went through the offseason. Last year, of course, we all know the situation. Michigan State's offense was terrible, sort of rudderless, not creative, not very good, and the defense was outstanding. And you go into this year, and they made some minor tweaks, but not really much of anything else, and expected it to change. And it didn't, because of course it didn't. So, so that's where they are now, and it's a similar deal. The offense, in some ways, has improved, but I think we've seen overall that, for what they want to do offensively, they don't really have enough skill on the roster to be explosive enough to have an offense that can run and operate the way they want to in terms of, they want to run the football. They want to run it consistently against good teams. They don't have much in terms of, Cody White's a nice player. Darrell Stewart, who's banged up, is a good player, but they're veterans. They don't have a ton in the reserves there in terms of explosive athletes. Brian Lewerke can be up and down. So it's really a flawed roster that hasn't been very, recruiting has been tough for Michigan State over the last couple of years. We'll say that. They've had off-the-field issues. They've had off-the-field distractions. They've had, Joe Bocci, of course, the captain, senior captain linebacker, failing a PED test in the middle of the season. You've had 6 players transfer. Mark D'Antonio has continued to be, named anyway in this Curtis Blackwell lawsuit. Then he's going to have to be deposed in that after the season. I mean, it's just been a mountain of things that had nothing to do with football that are standing there. And on top of that, the football's been bad. So there's been a lot of issues across the board. They need fresh air. That's the best I could. I don't know what that looks like or what that means, but they have got to get something different in the soup, because the idea, I think, for Mark D'Antonio is that we've won here before doing this exactly the way that I want it to be done, and I'm not going to deviate from that. I'm going to continue, but at some point, you do have to adapt. And I would argue that he would probably tell you that they probably did adapt at some point along the way when they were able to have their success. And there's not enough of that going on right now. This roster, at the end of the year, they've got a lot of seniors on this team, guys that are sort of snake bitten right now. They've got a couple games left. Those guys are going to be gone at the end of the year. Michigan State's looking at, in my eyes, they're looking at a rebuild, not a reload. And so you're going to ask the question of, does Mark D'Antonio want to do that? Their Michigan State's athletic director, Bill Beekman, has said, I think he told the State Journal on Friday, that firing D'Antonio isn't even a discussion. So if he's still here or there, what's it look like around him? And I think that's maybe the biggest question right now. But, they still have 3 to play, and they're not bowl eligible. So that's also a question, because, look, all the other stuff aside, Michigan State won the Big Ten championship in 2015. I believe that was the 3rd for Mark D'Antonio, which is a crazy number. I don't think anybody thought when he took the job in 2007 that he was going to win 3 Big Ten titles. He did. He took them to heights that most people thought were impossible. He did all that, but since then they're 15 and 18 in the Big Ten in over 4 years. So objectively, you look at those 4 years and you say that's not good enough. Michigan State can do better than that, and somebody's got to figure that out. And last week was, I would think they would call that rock bottom, or they would hope that would be rock bottom, blowing that 25-point lead against Illinois. So it doesn't get any easier, of course, but Michigan State's always found a way to play up in the Michigan game, as we know. But boy, I wonder right now, how much is in the tank, because that's a pretty exhausted football program right now, overall from top to bottom.
Michigan's had the bye week, improvement week, as Jim Harbaugh likes to call it. This team is as healthy as they've been since the opening game, Nick, and really playing their best football right now, we think.
Yeah, I would say so. I think that obviously the Notre Dame game was the best we've seen them. The Maryland game was pretty ho-hum, but it was more or less clean. They didn't have to do anything crazy. I don't think the offense is still fully operational to a point where they want it yet. But, I think we're starting to see situations where, we've talked about Josh Gaddis refocusing the offense on some of the concepts they do really well, some of the concepts they kind of exceed at. They did that, after the Wisconsin game, sort of rebuilt their base, and then now we're starting to see some of the stuff that maybe they put away earlier in the year. They're bringing that back out. So I think we're starting to see some wrinkles that we saw maybe early in the season that they weren't quite ready to rep yet, resurfacing a bit. So, for whatever reason, for probably a number of reasons, the offense obviously didn't start out the way it wanted to and had to sort of recenter itself. I don't think that the notion that Jim Harbaugh has just taken the offense away from that's not true. I don't think that's happening. I don't think that somebody's told Josh Gaddis you're going to have to run something else. I don't think that's happening. I think they're still running a lot of the same stuff they were trying to run earlier in the year. But they've found their foundation to work off of, so they found the few things in there that they know they really have kind of mastered and are now having the ability to expand on that. So I thought last week, or 2 weeks ago, I should say, against Maryland, it wasn't explosive necessarily, but I thought Josh Gaddis called a pretty good game. I thought that I was really impressed. In the latter half of the game, that touchdown to Nick Eubanks was, it was a 2 or 3 yard touchdown pass, but I thought that play call and the execution on that play call in that moment was about as good as we've seen in a situation like that, regardless of opponent. It was a really good read from Shea Patterson, a really well executed play overall, and then a great call by Gaddis in the moment to get a short yardage touchdown. That was a really good deal. And then, they set that up with similar action and got an easy one with Hassan Haskins later in the game. So, people, I suppose, probably thought, what is speed in space? What's that supposed to mean? And I think they probably assumed that meant 4 receivers on the field, pressing vertically, running all over the place. And in reality, speed in space is a run game. It's a run-based offense that's still working to get athletes in space one-on-one, and it is. And as you can see in those 2 instances, a tight end and a running back. Not guys that are running 4.3s, but still, guys who are able to get in space and score touchdowns. And I think that obviously that's the idea, and we'll see if they can continue to sort of tick upward here.
Well, Shea Patterson's taken a lot of stuff from Michigan fans this year, and a lot of it, I think, unfairly. And I think it goes back to the fact that he might not be the 5-star NFL guy that a lot of people thought a couple of years ago. So those expectations have weighted him down somewhat. But I think what he's showing us right now, at least, he is a gamer, Nick, and he's really providing good leadership, and his reads are getting better and better, I think.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. I think you nailed it. I mean, I think that the notion that he is a top-end NFL draft pick or something that maybe people wondered about when he signed as a 5-star worker, that's obviously not going to happen, and that just isn't who he is. And sometimes when kids get those expectations put on them, we see them lean into it, of course, as they're kids, but I mean, sometimes they're still unfair. And, I do think he was working against that from day one, but I think he was also working against that from the minute he got here, because I can remember, last winter, telling people, or I guess it was, the winter of 2018, just saying to anybody who would listen, you guys have got to calm down on this. This is not, is he going to throw for 4,000 yards? Is he going to do all this? It doesn't seem realistic to me. I got to tell you, so, but yeah, I think that, given everything started over again, I was a little surprised that the reads were such a struggle early in the season, but then again, he was also hurt.
Yeah.
So that didn't help, but no, I think you're right. I think he's settled in with those. He's more confident in what they're asking him to do. Like anybody else on the team, I think he's developed a few, base areas to work from and understands kind of what they're asking him to do. And then, I think it's funny. We were covering the Maryland game, and Austin Meek and I were talking, and Austin said something. He was joking. He's like, I think Shea needs 110,000 people to really get the best out of him, right? So I think he's a big gamer. He seems like a big game type guy. That's kind of his thing, where it seems like for the most part, we've gotten some of the best we've seen of Shea Patterson in some of those bigger games. Michigan State last year, he made some nice plays. Penn State this year. Wisconsin this year being an exception there, of course. But, we'll see how that trend's going into this week. But obviously from what we've gotten to know of Shea over the last couple of years, when it's a big game, as it is Saturday, typically he's ready to go. He doesn't really shy away from those moments, good and bad. I think he enters them willing to take the risks necessary to win games like that. And, so long as he's taking care of the football, because obviously that's been number one on the list. If he's taking care of the ball, I think he can be pretty effective for what they want to do.
Well, over on the other side of the ball, Don Brown and defense, we remember what happened in Madison. We saw it. But, I have to say, I think this defense has played really well this season, Nick. We had some concerns with that front, really much better than I thought it was going to be. What's your take on this defense and where they are right now?
I think they've done a nice job. I think Don Brown's done a nice job of mixing up some things, changing some things, and going against his own personal type or trend or whatever you want to call it. A lot more zone this year, a lot more versatility from personnel this year, a lot more, just variance of what they do. They've run a lot of the 3-3 stack stuff, with Josh Uche being kind of the Swiss Army player that a lot of us thought he could be, when the season started. We finally saw the 4 defensive ends out there together last week, especially, or 2 weeks ago, especially against Maryland, with Aiden Hutchinson moving inside with Michael Dana, and then Kwity Paye-Anuche in passing down situation. I mean, that's a pretty ferocious pass rush unit you've got there. And then I think that the evolution, or the emergence, I should say, of Cameron McGrone has maybe saved the whole thing here, because Josh Ross getting hurt that early, and Michigan struggling as much as it did. You got to remember, they're going after the Wisconsin game, and they're standing there saying, well, now we got to play, a first-year starter in the middle, and Cameron McGrone hasn't looked back. I mean, he's looked outstanding. So, really, I think across the board, I think a really good job of sort of retooling on the fly and adjusting by Don Brown. I think people, we hear about it all the time. Why is he always in man coverage? Why is he always in man coverage? Why on 3rd and long is he always in man coverage? Well, I mean, if you go look at the tape this year, he's not.
No.
Sometimes he is, but a lot of the times they're not. They'll drop out into a multitude of different zone looks from many areas, and I think that has given. I know it gave Notre Dame problems. Notre Dame didn't know what the hell it was looking at, because there was many times where they drop out into zone on 3rd and long or 3rd and medium, and Notre Dame's trying to run the crossing route stuff that has gotten Michigan before, and you can't do it against the zone. So those are positive signs. Obviously, I know everyone will sit there and say, not everyone, but a lot of people will say, I don't care. What are you going to do against Ohio State? And maybe that's fair, but at the same time, I think you can't discount the fact that Don Brown did some self-scouting and has adjusted a little bit, and while keeping maybe true to his whole mantra of they still bring a lot of pressure, they still go after the quarterback, and they're still very aggressive. So, it's been interesting and unique and kind of different, and the results so far in the Wisconsin game are about what they've been. Pretty good overall.
Looking ahead to this Saturday, Michigan State put up over 500 yards of offense, which is mind-boggling on Saturday.
Yeah.
Still got beat. So, we've talked about it earlier. They have their issues. But do you think they can still make things happen against this Michigan defense?
It's going to be really tough. The brightest spot, I thought, on Saturday for Michigan State, and before the thing got off the rails, what I thought about writing about was they did actually get some younger players. J.D. Duplain and Nick Samak are 2 interior offensive linemen who are freshmen who started, and I thought held up pretty well against. Illinois is not very good, but I would assume those guys will be in there again. They're better than anything else I've seen in there, so I would assume they'll be in there again. That's not great if you're Michigan State. They're freshmen. They look like they're going to be good players, but they're still freshmen, and that's something where that could be cause for concern against the Don Brown defense. Darrell Stewart's hurt. He didn't play last week. He's their best receiver, obviously. He can be, a difference maker and a guy who can make tough catches in traffic and things like that. If he can't play, that's tough. Cody White, obviously, is playing, but is only one guy. And Brian Lewerke kind of continues to be up and down, with the turnovers. And, he took a shot to the head, Mike, at the end of the game.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's something that's going to – we haven't talked to D'Antonio since. I don't know if that's something that's going to linger. So Lewerke said he was fine after the game, but, we know how these things go. Those brain injuries, it's not for the player to decide that he's going to play. So that would be something to look at as well. It's going to be really tough. The brightest spots that Michigan State has offensively, the brightest one is Elijah Collins, the redshirt freshman running back. But he really hasn't had room to do anything against anybody but, sort of the weaker end teams of the Big Ten. And, of all the things we've talked about with Michigan's defense, some of the stuff and the issues they've had, stopping the run really hasn't been an issue for Michigan's defense this year. They've sort of still been what we've seen from them, for the most part. I would think it'd be very tough for Michigan State to move the ball consistently. I think they could probably put together a better showing. I would expect, certainly, a better showing offensively than what we saw last year, because last year, 94 yards. I think it would be better than that. But the problem with Michigan State has been, they've been able to move the ball through the 20s, and then when they get in the red zone, everything magnifies because they don't have the type of athletes or enough of them anyway, that can make the one-on-one wins. They don't have a great offensive line. Their run game is not where it should be for a team that wants to run the ball like this. And every time they get, not even the red zone, every time they get inside the 40, it really starts to stall, because when the field shrinks and you don't have as much, to work with, you just don't have enough guys who can be able to make big plays. And so that's kind of where I'm at with it. I think that I wouldn't be shocked if they can move it through the 20 some, and and then we'll see. But it's going to be really tough. I think it'd be a tall order. I think they're absolutely going to need this game to be played, in the teens, or because I'm not sure if they're getting to 20, maybe, but it would have to be low scoring game, of course, which really isn't that different from every other year these two teams have played. So. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, you're right. I think it does have to be low scoring, and that means the Spartan defense has to come to play. And we know they're very good, they're very talented, but they seem to be wearing out. And watching them the last couple of weeks, that to me is the key matchup on Saturday. Nick, what can they do to frustrate or stop this Michigan offense?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, that's what I've been wondering for 6 weeks. Is just like when is the gas tank going to dry out here? Because you can only, as a defense. I mean, and they have good players. Even without Joe Bocci, they have good players. I mean, Raekwon Williams is outstanding. Kenny Willekes is very good, of course, as we know. Josiah Scott hasn't been all the way himself, and even he got dinged up in the last game. But, he still can be, a top-end player. Antoine Simmons has played really well. Mike Panashuk and Jacob Panashuk are really good players up front. They have players, but when you're constantly being hung out to dry by an offense, and this was the case for the better part of this season, when you're constantly being hung out to dry by that, I just often wondered, when does the breaking point pop in, and when does that just become so frustrating that you can't you can't overcome it? And of course, last week we saw a situation where you get a 28-0 lead, and you can't even hang on to that against a terrible Illinois team. They're really sort of emotionally unstable right now. I feel like, as a football team. I think Joe Bocci not being there probably has a lot to do with that. I think the losing has a lot to do with that. I don't think guys are very confident in themselves overall. I've seen this movie before. I've seen Michigan with Brady Hoke at the end of Brady Hoke. That's what it looks like to me. It looks like a team that has guys that are talented that aren't playing to their talent level because they're just trying way too hard, and everything is quicksand. We saw that game. They start out 28-0, and they're fired up, and then all of a sudden, everyone just falls asleep, and it's just like, what happened here, And suddenly they don't, and now it's time to get out of it, and they can't get out of it, and that's what it feels like to me. And I just wonder how much they have left in the tank mentally to kind of get through this, because it's been a challenge, and this isn't a situation where, and I see this a lot with teams and programs everywhere, where they say, well, we've won here before, let's just do what we did before. And then you look at the roster and say, well, this roster has won anything. So I don't know what you expect them to do, because they've really never won anything. So I'm not sure what they're supposed to – you can show them tape of something someone did 7 years ago, but they weren't there. And that starts to become a problem. We've seen it with Michigan through the years, with the Hoke years and things like that, where it was like, well, this is what Michigan does. And you're like, well, you're telling that to guys who weren't here, and they're going to have to find their own way. And I think right now you've seen that with Michigan State's, the bulk of the roster is that guys are trying to have to find their own way here, and they're kind of swimming upstream, and it's been tough. So it does. They're a double-digit underdog, and that's what it feels like it should be in tall order. But Mark D'Antonio's made some moves in this game before, but this one seems as uphill a climb as probably any he's had, probably right up there with the 16 game, where they ended up making that maybe closer than people thought it would be at the end. But I think if you remember how that game went, it was pretty much done in the start of the fourth quarter. So that's what this feels like to me. This feels like a lot like that game. Michigan's obviously not as good as that 16 team was, and Michigan State's probably not as bad as its 16 team was. But mentally right now, both teams kind of seem to be in the same spot.
Final thought and question on the game coming up then, Nick. And, I've been around watching this rivalry for a long time.
Yeah.
And I've seen it not go to script way too many times for both sides. And, I know it's trivial when you say throw out the records. A lot of people still laugh about it. But in my experience, that has been the case. And it's Michigan State's Super Bowl. Let's never forget that. They're going to bring it.
Yeah.
Do you have any reason not to think that this is going to be a war on Saturday?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people tell me I think this is going to be a blowout, or if Harbaugh gets a chance, he's going to run up the score. And I mean, we all thought that in 2016, and it didn't happen. And that was the day I left there and said, I'm never going to pick pick a blowout in this game again, because it was one of those things where it would take a lot, even at the current situation with all the junk going on and all the bad vibes. It would take, I feel like, a lot for a Mark D'Antonio team to lay down and let Michigan, of all people, run them out of a building. It would take an awful lot for that to happen, and I don't see that happening. I mean, I think that it's for a team to get blown out like that. At some point, the opposition has to just be playing against air, or the other team has kind of given up and ceded and okay, you can have it. I don't see that happening in much. I mean, maybe in the fourth quarter or something, you could, if you're able to get one on them and keep them down. But I would fully expect Michigan to have to come into that stadium ready to play the full 60 there, because even if it's something where you've got them down by a touchdown or 10 for most of the game, it would still be, okay, one or two plays and they're back in this thing. Like last year. Last year was a lot like that. And so that to me is what I would expect. And I'm sure, knowing Jim Harbaugh and Michigan's program, that's fully what they expect too. Because I think the line was 12.5, but a lot of people said, I think that's too low. And I said, well, that seems about right to me, because I just don't see this. Yeah, I would have a hard time seeing it. That would be a new one on the Mark D'Antonio ledger of what's going on here if they got run out of a building against Michigan, because that would maybe signify something that really isn't recoverable. And, maybe that's the last part of what we'll see here. But, yeah, I would expect this to be a fight for a while. I'm not expecting Michigan State to win the game, but I certainly would expect them to give them a fight.
Well, we shall see noon on Saturday at the Big House. It is such a rivalry that I don't see any way that this gets to be a blowout. So it's going to be interesting to see, though. A lot on the line for both teams. So, as always, our guest here on the show today has been Nick Baumgardner from The Athletic. Detroit. Nick, always a pleasure having you join us, and we thank you for your time and look forward to your next visit.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. Anytime.
Quick Hits is next as we wrap it up for another week here on The Michigan Man on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew.
On Quick Hits today, at Jim's presser on Monday, he said Michigan will not be lulled to sleep this weekend. He said he respects Mark D'Antonio and his program and knows they will be prepared. Just what you would expect him to say. From an injury perspective, we are as healthy as we have been all year. I guess the big news out of the presser is that Chris Evans will be reinstated and back with the team next year. There weren't a lot of details about his situation, but apparently he has done what he's needed to do and earned the chance to rejoin the team, so I say good for him. On Thursday's Visitors Edition, we'll be joined by Graham Couch from the Lansing State Journal. We'll have some game day facts regarding this great rivalry and the weather forecast for the 12 noon kickoff. I don't think the snow will be gone by then, but hopefully we don't get any during the game on Saturday. Thanks again to Nick Baumgardner for being our guest today. That will do it for this week's Game Day edition. Make sure you join us on Thursday for our chat with Graham Couch from the Lansing State Journal. Until then, have a great Wolverine week, everyone. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go Blue.
Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!